Hello, this is Michelle from CNC Designs. I'm an independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator in New Zealand, and I'm doing my card making 101 class. And for this one, we're going to talk about embossing. So if you're not aware what embossing means, it is the art of making something raised up. So with stamping, there's a few different ways, with card making, there's a few different ways that you can do embossing. You can do what we call dry embossing, or you can do heat embossing. Either way, you end up with a raised surface on the cardstock that gives it a bit of interest, sometimes texture. And I will be showing you how to do both types in this video. So first of all, the tools that you'll need, if you're doing the heat embossing, you need a heat tool. And this is the one Stampin' Up! Sells, and there's two different levels on here. And then you need to plug it in. It has a little foot, so it can be set upright while it's cooling off. And there's a safety edge here so you don't touch the metal parts. You will also need a sticky ink. In this case, we use Versamark ink. It's a clear ink pad, but it stamps sticky, so then you can pour on your embossing powder. For this one, I'll be doing the white embossing powder, but Stampin' Up! Sells 6 different embossing powders in 3 different packs. We have white, black, clear. We also have a silver, a gold, and a copper. And you can find those on page 128 of the main catalog. So they can come in packs of 3. So you get 3 of each one in a nice container here. A little goes a long way, so one of these small containers will last you quite a while. And the heat tool is also shown on that page. If you're going to do dry embossing, that entails just putting pressure onto the cardstock to make it raised. With Stampin' Up! You can use embossing folders to do that. The traditional way of doing that is just using a stylus and putting pressure onto your cardstock or your vellum. And I'll just show you. So just putting a bit of pressure onto your cardstock or your vellum. We used to trace around stencils to do this. Then makes one side of it raised. So see, that side's raised. It's also turned white because this is vellum. So traditionally doing the dry embossing, you would use a stylus on your cardstock or your vellum. But the easier way to do it is with embossing folders. And I'll be showing that to you today. So this is a small embossing folder, and it opens up, has a hinge side, opens up, and then it has the design inside. One side is raised, I'm not sure if you can see that, and one side is depressed. So when you put your cardstock in the middle and you put it through the Stampin' Emboss cut machine, it will push that impression through the cardstock, which I'll show you in a little while. And with Stampin' Up! There's 2 different size machines they have. I'll be showing you the mini machine because you'll be able to see it in the video. So this is the mini machine. The sides open up, and then it comes, there's a handle to crank things through, and it comes with plates that are numbered. And each numbered plate has instructions when to use it and how to layer it up, as well as an instruction booklet. You can also get the full-size cut and emboss machine from Stampin' Up! And I'll just show you, it's quite large, too big for my video. So that shows you the difference. And both sides open up. The difference with them, mainly the size, is the width of your embossing folder that you put through, or your dies, that if you're going to die cut. So if you're getting one of these tools, if you know that you're only going to use small embossing folders or small dies, narrow ones, then the mini one is perfectly fine. If you're going to be doing a lot and the sizes of your folders or dies are going to vary, so you might be using a wider embossing folder versus the narrow ones. If you're going to be using the larger ones, I suggest you get the larger cut and emboss machine. You don't really need to have two machines, but because I do a lot of classes, I have both. So, of course, you'll also need your cardstock. So I'm going to do a couple cards here for you, showing you the different techniques that you use for embossing. So let me just move a few things so we can get started. So first, we're going to do a dry emboss, and let me just show you what I'm talking about. So the words here, if I hold it at an angle, you might be able to see they're a bit shiny, and they're actually raised, like if you touch them. So that is heat embossed, where I put powder on there and melted the powder. The rest of this card is dry embossed. So this background paper has got some texture in it. See some lines there. I've even added the subtle embossing folder when I did the world to get a bit of texture there. And this piece of foil has embossed letters on it. So this is a mixture of the wet and the dry. And the little world spins. Now I will put a link at the bottom of this video with all the products I use, as well as any of the cards that I show you. So this card, there is a video I did a few years ago showing how to make the cards. If you want to do that, check in the links below and you'll be able to go right to the video to make this card. I'll be showing some other cards at the end of this video with other ways that you can do the different types of embossing, and if I've done any videos with that, I again will link them at the bottom of this one. So I'm going to using the stamp set here, the Snowflake Wishes stamp set, which is in the main catalog. I'm going to make a Christmas card, and I'm also going to both cards I'm going to use the two different folders that are in the Wintry 3D embossing folder set. There is a snowflake one, which I just showed you a moment ago, and there is one with some pine needles. So, a previous video I showed how to measure up your card stock and the different sizes. So this card is going to open this direction, and I've already cut a piece of white cardstock for the sentiment for the inside, and I've got a piece of cardstock for the outside. So this piece I cut specifically to fit the width of this narrow embossing folder. And previous video I showed the different types of mats that you can decide how to size up your cardstock to layer up, and that's how I came up with this size here. So when you're dry embossing, turn this, nice thing with the tools, you can do left or right-handed. So I think I might try left-handed today. When you're dry embossing, you've got your embossing folder. It's got the label at the front. There's also a line, and then it has the copyright symbol on the back. When you're using Stampin' Up! Embossing folders, the top of the folder has the word Stampin' Up! At the top, and that's the bottom of the folder. You open it with the hinge, and you place your cardstock inside. Now, you can put in larger ones, sometimes your cardstock is smaller than the width. For this one, I made the cardstock the exact width. And if you want it to line up perfectly, like if I put that in and the cardstock was smaller and it didn't line up, you can use the line on the front to line things up. So I could put the cardstock right where that line is at the front. And if I close it with the cardstock, it's not as easy to tell because it's white cardstock. Where that line is, I know this is perfectly lined up. Now, before I emboss that, I just remembered I want to stamp. If you want any stamping to appear on your embossed image, you need to do it first, because when it's flat and there's no ridges in it. So for this one, I'm going with Balmy Blue, which is the color of the background cardstock, and I'm just going to simply stamp a sentiment that says, "Thank you, Snow Much." And I'm just going to pop that down there, straight down, straight up. And always good to close your ink pads so you don't accidentally get something in the pad. I've had that problem before. Okay, now the ink dries really quickly, the Stampin' Up! Ink. And now we can simply pop it into our embossing folder, and then we put our plates on. So you have a base plate, and then depending on which your Stampin' Up! Folder is, whether it's just a standard embossing folder or a 3D embossing folder, you'll use one of the other plates. The way to tell is the thickness of the folder as well as what it says on the paper. So this says it's Wintry 3D. There you go, embossing folder. So that way I know it's a embossing folder, and that therefore I know I need to use this one. So it shows that I use plate 1, I put my embossing folder between it, and then I put plate 4 on top. So I've got plate 1 in there. I put my embossing folder on there. Now, after stamping that, I can actually look through the image to decide where I want the snowflakes to go based on where I have my words. Now, I want them to go where there's no snowflake right on the word, so I'm moving the words down a bit to make sure I don't have a snowflake going right over the words, so it's easier to see the words. This is actually the first time I've used this folder, so I'm not quite sure how nice it comes out on white. So then you put your embossing folder down, and then you put your plate on top. Now you want to make sure that the plates are covering the entire surface that you're going to use. So that's what we call a sandwich when you're using a cut and emboss machine, whether you're die cutting or embossing. This is called the sandwich. So you have like your essentially your bread and what's in the middle. So here in this case it's embossing folder. Make sure it's going in the folded side first. That gives it even pressure, and holding it there, you crank the handle. So I'm going to crank the handle until it grabs. And then grab the top, holding that so your fingers don't go inside, and just crank it through. And this is what we call dry embossing. When I first started with card making, long time ago, dry embossing, as I showed you in the beginning, was just taking a stylus and tracing around a template. So ran it through once, didn't really make much noise, doesn't look like much has happened, but when you open it up and take your cardstock out, see the difference? So even without having the words, I could have just embossed the cardstock and it looks really nice. Now that's called embossing, because it's raised. Now the back side is what's called debossing because it's pressed down. Now you could use either side, see it looks lovely that way as well. So either side can be used, but we're going to use this side for now. Let me get my machine out of the way. And now let's go finish up the card. So that's going to be the top of the card. Now I'm going to do the other type of embossing for the rest of it. And I'm going to use the snowflake stamp. And I could just pop that there. That looks quite nice. But I want to give some impressions, some interest in the background. So doing that, I am going to do some heat embossing. So I need my Versamark ink pad. I'm going to emboss it with the white Stampin' Emboss powder. And I also need my heat tool. So with Versamark, it is see-through, so you can't actually see where you're stamping, but on some papers, but if you hold it up to the light, you get an idea. It's also used for watermark. So if I just stamp it straight onto something and don't put any powder on it, I get a watermark look. So it gives me almost a wet look. So you can see I can leave that to dry and that would stay just like that, but I want some white to come out. So I'm going to come around and I'm going to stamp all the edges, around all the edges, because I know that I'm going to be able to see the edges when I put that centerpiece on. So just ink it up a bit and go around. I'm going to try to do this quickly so I can get the powder on. You don't want the background to dry before you have a chance to put the powder on. If you have a big image like this, you can do a little at a time and then go back and do some more. So I'm just going to do half of it at the moment. And when you're doing powder, it's good to have a scrap piece of paper underneath. So the scrap paper is to collect any powder that doesn't get used. And then I can collect it back into the pot. So there's my white powder. And that is sticky. It's basically still wet. And I'm just going to put a big pile of powder on there. Now it probably looks like I'm using too much powder, but as I said, you collect it up in the end. So any places I missed, I just add a bit more powder and just tap it. Just give it a little tap. So see, there's the powder there. Okay. One thing you want to watch out when you're doing this is don't rub the powder after you've put it on there, because it's not going to stick again once it's been rubbed off. It will stay permanent once we heat emboss it. So I'm just going to move that out of the way and then do the rest of my sides of my card. The reason we put the paper here is so you can then funnel it back into the little pot. And then you can use the paper again. So I've still got half that side to do. So I could heat that up straight away, or I can carry on stamping and putting more powder, as long as I don't stamp over where I've already placed powder. So I'm just trying to be a bit more careful here. I'm going to fold it in half, because I just want it to go around the edges. And this, as I said, will only be seen underneath the white cardstock on the front. And maybe one last little piece here. And then I'm going to put that part there. Okay. Now I need to add more powder. So I'm going to bring in my paper again, add some powder to the areas I haven't done. So you can pour lots of powder on, or you can just pour a little and just let it run around the edges, as long as you have something to catch it below. So it's going to catch anywhere that had the Versamark. So you can do this with just wet ink pads, with wet stamp ink, but Versamark is the better way to do it because it gives you a clear background. So again, clean up your mess. And make sure you put your powder away before you heat it, because once it's heated, you can't go back. Okay, so now we've got this. So now we've got that all around the edges. If you have some spots like that, see how there's a stray powder there? You can take a little brush. In this case, I have a little makeup brush. and you can brush off the little bits there. But you're not actually going to see that part underneath. So you can brush that off. You're not going to see that part underneath where I put the card. So I could brush that whole section off, but I'll leave it. So the next part is going to be a bit noisy. So I will just tell you what's happening. So as you, hopefully you can see how that looks granule? That's powder stuck to the Versamark. So now we're going to heat it with the heat tool. Has a little slide switch. It has 2 levels, 1 and 2. It all depends on what you're heating up. If you're doing vellum, you want to do it at 1. So I'm going to heat it until it melts, and you'll know because it'll be shiny, and being white on blue, it'll be a bit more obvious. So I'm going to go around and heat that. It'll be a bit noisy, but I want you to see how it looks when it changes, okay? So we've got our powder there. Turn your heat tool on. You don't want it too close. I don't know if you can quite see. There we go. Okay, sorry if it got a bit blurry there. I was trying to keep it in focus. So you may have noticed, let's see, come on, focus. Come on, focus. Okay, come on. There we go. Okay, sorry about the out of focus. So you may have noticed as I went around, some of the dry part turned quite white. When you're done embossing, heat embossing, you want to use the light. So it's good to have a bright light or by the window, and do it at an angle to see if you can notice any areas that haven't turned shiny. And once it's cooled off, it won't come off, and it's not sticking, doesn't burn your fingers. But you want to check because one thing you don't want to do is heat it too long because it'll go flat. So at the moment it's raised and it's shiny. But you want to go around and check to see if there's any areas that don't look like they've melted. Now can you see right there? Okay, there. So those areas here, see how they look different? And I can tell up close that there's still some powder there that hasn't melted. So going around and checking for that, then you can just heat up gently those areas that you missed, which I'll do now. Okay, so hopefully you saw how it changed from that powdery look to the melted, heated look after I heated it. Okay, so that's my background. And you want to put your heat tool somewhere where it's not going to melt anything. So that gives me a nice white snowy background. And now I'm going to place that card right on the top. And I've also got a card for the inside, which I want to stamp. Now I'm going to stamp that with the same image. You can clean it off if you've done the Versamark, but it's not necessary because the Versamark is clear ink and it's just going to it's just sticky ink, so it doesn't matter if I clean that off or not. But I was thinking of doing something like, there, and just having the two edges stamped. There we go. So just the two edges for the inside of my stamp with the blue. And that will be for the inside. So I'll stick that down. You can stick it down with whatever you like, your favorite, whatever your favorite adhesive is. I do like to use tear and tape on big pieces like this that I don't need wiggle room. So just a bit of tape. Don't need to tape up all four corners because it's just on the inside, so chances of it coming off very slim. And I do my little tabs. And just stick that down on the two exposed corners, making sure I've got a nice even space around the edges, and then I can pull the rest off. There we go. So on my nice lovely heat embossed front, I'm going to pop this piece down. And if I want, I could add some die cut elements to it as well. Now because this is raised in various spots, I'm going to use my Tombow liquid glue to stick it down. That looks quite nice there. And sometimes if your glue gets stuck, tap it a few times. Misbehaving glue. I'm going to have to poke the end with a needle or something just to get it started. Not too close to the edges, but because it's as I said, because it's an uneven surface, I'm using the liquid glue to hold this down. And we will pop that up the front. And so that card has both heat embossed and dry embossed images on it. Now I could bling it up a bit by, cutting out a snowflake to put on the front. I've actually got some shimmery ones. Let me see how they look. So I decided it needs a bit of bling. So I've got some shimmery, some blue ribbon here. I'm just going to pop that down in the center. The best way to put your ribbon on is with a bit of tape. So I'm just going to pop that, say, right there. Just enough to hold the ribbon in place. And then I'm just going to give it kind of a swirly effect, letting it stick onto that tape. And then I've got a shimmery snowflake I'm going to pop right in the center there with some dimensionals. So with this shimmery snowflake, one side shimmers and the other side is plain, so you can actually color the other side if you want it to. And I believe it's made perfect size to fit one of our mini dimensionals. So pop that right there in the center, and I'll just pop that over like there. And so that just gives a little bling to a little card. So that shows different ways of doing embossing. Now I'm going to show you another card to show another reason why you would want to do heat embossing. This one's going to be a Christmas card. And so for this, I'm going to use the Poinsettia Petals set. Now I've already gone and heat emboss with black the poinsettia and a couple of the leaves. So if you can see there, I've already heat embossed those. They're shiny there. And I'm going to dry emboss the background, similar to what we had before, but this time, first of all, the card's going to open that direction. But the other thing with the embossing is I'm going to use the other embossing folder in that set. That's the 3D Wintry set. And this folder, I'm going to do the pine bows. Again, I cut my piece to the same size as I had before. I'm going to bring my embossing folder in. I know it's a 3D folder, so I start with plate 1, put the embossing folder in with the folded edge facing in, and then put the top plate on. That's my sandwich. Holding the sandwich so it catches. Once it catches, I can just simply hold the top of the machine and just crank it through. Now you have to have the sandwich correct. If it feels really tight, like it's not going through at all, you need to check that you've got your sandwich set up properly, because it depends on whether it's a thicker embossing folder or a thin embossing folder. There we go. Got it through. Okay, so we have a nice deep impression. That's what the 3D folders are for, to give you a really deep impression. The ones that aren't marked 3D don't give you as deep of impression, but they do give you embossing. So that is the pressed in deboss side, and that's the emboss side. So I'm going to use that on the front of my card, and I'm going to stamp on the front of my card, but this time I'm going to stamp just with the Versamark ink. Now I mentioned before that the Versamark ink is also known as a watermark stamp pad, because it leaves it looking like it has a wet surface. So I'm going to stamp basically the same places I stamped before with the other Snowflake card, because I'm going to have a piece on the top, but this time it's only going to be with this clear sticky ink. Now when you ink it up, you can't see that it's inked up. If you put it at an angle, sometimes you can see the shine on there, and that's how you know that you've inked up all of it. Or just give it, you know, not too much pressure, but just enough where it feels that you've got the ink on there. So I'm just going to, nice firm pressure, and I'm going to go around and put this around the edges, because I know they'll be seen once I put my cardstock over the top. So I just want to give it an impression of maybe some more pine bows coming out the sides. So just inking it up and going around. And giving it that watermark look. So it doesn't matter which direction I'm going, because I'm just trying to give it a certain look down the outside. So I know that the only part that's going to be seen is the edge of the card. Oh. Sorry about that. I'm just trying to turn the stamp over. And I'll bring it up close in a minute so you can have a better look at what I've got going on here. And the nice thing with making handmade cards is nobody actually knows what it's supposed to look like, so you can do whatever you want. Store-bought cards all end up looking pretty much the same. And if you had something that had like a character on it, most people know what that character is supposed to look like, you know, like Mickey Mouse or something like that. But with these cards, you just make it however you like. Okay. Alright, so this time I'm not going to put any powder on, and I'm not going to heat it up. I'm just going to leave it to dry on its own. So there you go. So you can see that had no color on it, but it brings out a darker shade of whatever cardstock you stamp on, which is, if you've ever seen things with a watermark, you do see like a subtle image in the background. So I'll leave that just to dry on its own. Doesn't matter about the overlapping there, because this is going to be covering up the front of it. So that's another use of the Versamark. Now I'm going to color this in. So the nice thing when you emboss on something that you want to color, because it's raised up the edges, it keeps the ink from bleeding into different parts. Now there's different pens that you can use to color with. We have our Stampin' Write pens that are water-based pens, and we have our Stampin' Blend pens that are alcohol-based. So I can use either of them on this card. The only thing is I don't actually have, I'm going to use Real Red, but the background card here is Garden Green. Now I don't have the Stampin' Blends in Garden Green. We don't make it in a Garden Green color. So I'm going to go ahead and color them just with the regular Garden Green water-based Stampin' Write pen. One side is a brush tip and the other side is a fine tip for like writing. So I'm just going to go through, and you can get yourself some nice texture using the pens depending on how you color. So because I've got it embossed, I can go right over the embossed section and it doesn't matter because it's not going to stick to the raised embossed part. So I can color straight over the lines. I can do it quite sloppy, so see, I can do it real big, and I don't have to be as gentle because I have already embossed this. So we'll just go around, color that in, and then I can go back. I'll color the other one off camera. Now with the Stampin' Blends, you have a light and a dark color. So with that, what I like to do is and the smaller tip is a chisel tip, so a bit different than the brush tip. So I like to go in and highlight some of the features that might be darker based on shadow, and go in and do those first, maybe over some of the lines, and then come back through with the light color to help it blend together. So, and just get some of that color in there. So again, I can be a bit sloppy because I've embossed the black and the ink will not stick onto the embossed sections. I will be die cutting these out. This set actually has a matching die, so I will be die cutting these out in a moment using the same machine that I used for embossing. And now I'm going to brush over it with the lighter shade, and I can just go straight over. So see, I did the dark just randomly and it hasn't stuck, and we still get that shine, but I'm just going to go straight over with the light blends, which, as the name implies, the colors blend together. And with the blends, you don't get any pen streak marks in the end, which I'll show you once I get this finished. You don't want to get too close to the edge with the blends because it does bleed a bit. So that's the other reason having embossed images is really good, because it helps to keep it from bleeding to the other areas. If you are using Stampin' Blends, you do want to do it on something that is going to be placed on top of the card, not straight onto the card base, because as I said, it does bleed through, and I'll show you the back of this in a minute so you'll see what I'm talking about. I will be doing videos in the other videos with this Card Making 101 about different types of pens and inks as well as dies and fussing, cutting, etc. So have a look in my video series and you'll see all the different tips and ideas. And each one I will be making at least one card for you to show you the technique in use. And hopefully you'll learn from these. Okay, so come in closer so you can have a quick look. Okay, so that has blended the colors in, gives me different shades. Where this, I'm not sure if you can quite see, you can still see some of the lines, of the green lines on there. Now I'll color the other one in quickly. And I can show you, even if you're just using our water-based pens, you can give it a bit of effect with just the one color. So the water-based pens just come in the basic color. The ink refills can be used to refill the ink pads as well as the water-based pens, the Stampin' Write pens. You cannot use the ink refills to refill the Stampin' blends because they're alcohol-based. But I also do a video showing that. So if you look, you can still see some of the lines of the green coming through there, but the lines here have blended together. If you want to give it a bit of depth after you've using your Stampin' Write pens, you can just come in with the other tip and just add some more lines in the areas that would normally have a bit of darkness, a bit of shading coming in from the center. So I've just come in the same color, but I'm writing over it, so it's adding more depth and darkness to it. And again, I don't have to be that gentle, neat and tidy because the fact that this is heat embossed, so I don't have to run the risk of smearing any of the ink. So I'll finish coloring that and then I'll die cut these out and show you. Okay, so I finished coloring them and I've die cut them out. So I have the two leaves and the poinsettia. And I'm going to do a bit more stamping. For the inside, I'm going to bring in those two colors with my garden green. And I'm going to use my real red. And again, I'm just going to do either side. Now see, I wobbled it when I inked it up, so I got ink on that side, but that'll be fine as long as I don't wobble it when I stamp it. So I'm just going to do opposite sides, straight down, straight up. So that didn't matter that I had ink on that edge. I'll clean it off just in case. And then I'm going to come down the angle here. And then I am going to do the real red. Clean my fingers off, I just put it in the red. So with the photopolymer stamps, the reason for having the see-through is because they can be what we call 2 or 3 or 4 steps, so you have multiple steps. So I've done the berries for the inside, and then I can turn it around and line it up to fit the image that I've already stamped. And because I can see through it, I can line it straight up, get the color right there where I want it. So now we'll try this one. And that's the nice thing, is you can add the color without having to get your pens out to color it. So I could just simply color that in, but there's the inside of the card. Let's get it put together. So we'll pop the inside there, again with just a bit of tear and tape. Now I'm doing videos, other videos I'll be doing in the card making 101 series is die cutting versus fussy cutting. you know, when and how to use that, different types of inks, what to use and when, using your pens, your blends, your ink refills, and lots of other tools to the trade, as well as some techniques. So pull off a bit to create a tab. Make sure it's the right way up, but in this case it doesn't really matter because I've got them going, goes the right way up either way. And giving just a bit of edge in the two opposite corners. Once I'm happy with that, I just pull the tab through. Now we'll put the top together. Now I could put it that way, that looks quite interesting. Or I could put it this way, and I think that's my preferred way of going. So let's get some glue on there to hold it down. I just put extra glue in the center because of the embossing to hold it in place better. And then I'm just going to go wiggle this into place. So I've got the same color embossed section as the base card. So it won't stand out as much as doing a different color, so white on blue. But this one, I did it that way, so it's just a subtle texture. And in fact, it almost looks like the texture is coming from behind because it's the same type of image. Now I'm going to layer up my poinsettia. But before I do that, I'm going to do my sentiment. So that's going to be popped up there, but it looks a bit plain in the front. So I'm going to do the sentiment, and this time I'm going to heat emboss the sentiment. So I've got that to stamp. So once again, we start with our Versamark, ink it up, and press it where you want it to go. So I'm just putting it on a scrap of basic white cardstock. Good pressure, just no wobbling, just straight down. And you can almost hear it peel away because it's that sticky. And this time I'm going to use basic black. So I want it to be the same color as the background that I had in there. So because it's a small piece of card, I've got my container that I keep things in, so to keep it separated. So sometimes I just pour it straight into the container. Give it a bit of a tap. I tapped it a bit too much. So you see all the stray bits there. Sometimes they come off when you give it a tap. The other thing you can do is the little brush. You tend to get the little stray bits if you have too much static electricity on your cardstock. We do have a tool called you can get a embossing buddy. We used to sell it, but we don't any longer. And you can use that to help take some of the static electricity off. Otherwise, you just do your best. Okay, so those little extra bits in there are actually going to heat emboss when I do heat it up. So using something like this, I can then tap it to the edge and then dump it in there. Okay, and then just keep it all safe and sound. So I will heat this off screen so it's not that noisy and come back and show you what I've done. Okay, so I heat embossed that. You can see how it's shiny and black. And then I die cut it out. I mean, fussy cut that out. And my flower is die cut. So I think I might pop that up, seeing how the flower looks best. And, we'll determine where I put my words. that's part of the trouble when you're making the card, is doing the final bits to decide what looks good where, and whether you want things to be symmetrical or not symmetrical, or how you want it to look. Well, I think I actually liked it better that way. Yeah, I think I like that. Okay, so then it's just a matter of sticking things down and doing different layers or depths using your Stampin' dimensionals really can add to the look of a card. So, get my dimensionals out here. So the leaves, I think I will stick them down afterwards. I will stick the flower up, and you can use things like your bone folder to give a bit more depth to things that are going to stick up. So if you just bend it a bit, give it a bit of shape to it. So I'm just holding the center and using the edge of my bone folder to give that a bit of a shape before I stick that down. And then I will just use one dimensional right in the center to pop it down. Just pop that slightly going over the edge. And then these guys, I might give them a bit of dimension as well to add interest to the card. It all depends on what you're doing with your card, because if it's going in the post, you don't want to add too much dimension since it will get squished. But if it's being hand delivered to somebody, you can do lots to add more dimension to it. So I'm just going to put a mini dimensional down at the tip of each of these. And then I'm going to use glue to put them in place. So I've got a mini dimensional there to give it some height, and a little bit of glue down the end that's going to be tucked away. And then I'm just going to choose where I want it to go. I think that one going there. So press down the glue and then hold that down. And the same for the other one. Bit of glue at the bottom, hold it in place. And then slip this. I think that looks good. And then I might just pop a dimensional under that little piece there. Kind of hold that in place. And then maybe one at the top. So always a work in progress as you're doing your project. You decide where you want to put things and how you want it to look. I'm just adding those. So if this is going in the post, I might not add as much dimension to it, and I'd worry about things getting stuck. So now the words there, I am going to add a couple small dimensionals just to give that some height as well on either edge. And these mini dimensionals are great for smaller things that you are trying to put down. But if you don't have them, you can always cut your large dimensionals into pieces. So that's the nice thing with dimensionals. You can cut them down to the size that you need. And the edges of the dimensional pad that hasn't been cut, you can cut strips off there and use that as well. So I'm just going to pop that like right there. And that is done. So there we go. We've got our heat embossed and our dry embossed on that card there. And then our other one where we've got our dry embossed and our heat embossed is behind it. So I hope you enjoyed that, learning about the different types of embossing. Please give me a thumbs up if you did. Make sure you subscribe so you'll be notified of other videos coming out. I will be continuing this series of card making 101 projects with, as I said, various things that beginners need to know with card making. The sets that I used here, I will list them below, all the products used, so if you want to purchase them, contact your Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, or you can go direct to my website, michellekritchley.stampinup.net. If you are here in New Zealand and don't already have a demonstrator. So we use the Poinsettia Petals and the Snowflake Wishes, along with the different inks, Versamark, and embossing powders, white and black. So make sure you get your hands on those if you want to do any of these projects. Thanks so much for watching, and enjoy your day. Bye! Oh, I nearly forgot to show you the samples of other cards that I said I would at the end. So here you go. Some of these cards I do have videos showing you how to make them, and I will link that below in the description. So with this one, there's embossing in the background, and I stamped before embossing like we did today, as well as there's embossing on the different die cut sections. So that's all dry embossing on this card here. Then this is one that I've done recently, and with this one the dry embossing is on the layer at the bottom, and then I sponged around it to give it a bit of color to it. So there's dry embossing on there. This one is a nice simple card stamped in that section, and then I did the heat embossing just so you can see the words. So it's raised it up as well as done it in white so they're more noticeable. This is one of my favorite ones I've done a few years ago. I use this in a lot of pictures online. So this is the 3 different types of embossing powders that we sell: the silver, the copper, and the gold. So that just shows the 3 of them using the same image, but it shows all 3. And then I did different types of ribbon in the back to bring in all those colors. So no sentiment on this, it could be for any occasion. But it just shows the heat embossing. I did a video with this. This is the Joseph's coat technique. So with that, you do the background in multicolors and then emboss with clear embossing. So you can see how it's shiny. That's clear embossing. So whatever color was beneath the clear embossing will come out, and it will protect it so it can't be colored over. So with this one, the only embossing I did is I did a little pool of the 3 different colors of embossing powder and just heated it in a little pool, and then used the die to cut them out. This is actually a party hat die, but I did it there so it looks like 3 different awards. I did this around in honor of the Olympics, so we have our gold, our bronze, and our silver awards there. So embossing powder can be used for lots of different reasons. And then this one I mentioned with the heat gun, there is a level 1 and a level 2. So if you're embossing on vellum, see this is see-through thin vellum with the white embossing powder, you would use it at level 1 so it doesn't scorch it or make it bend too much. So this is one of my more recent cards using cut out fussy cut images from some of the paper. And so then that's the next layer and the final layer. So the only embossing on here was the words on the vellum, but I just wanted to show you that card. So I hope you enjoyed those, and if you want to make any of those other cards that I've got videos on, check the links in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!